The Chernobyl disaster, what happened and its long-term effects. On April 25th and 26th, 1986, the worst nuclear accident in history occurred when a reactor at a nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine exploded and burned. The incident, which took place behind a veil of secrecy, became a turning point in both the Cold War and the history of nuclear energy. More than 30 years later, scientists estimate that the area around the former plant may remain uninhabitable for up to 20,000 years. The disaster occurred near the city of Chernobyl in the former Soviet Union, which had made major investments in nuclear energy after World War II. Beginning in 1977, Soviet scientists installed 4 RBMK nuclear reactors at the plant, located just south of what is now Ukraine's border with Belarus. On April 25, 1986, routine maintenance was scheduled for the 4th reactor at the V.I. Lenin nuclear power plant, and workers planned to use the downtime to test whether the reactor could still be cooled in the event of a power outage. However, during the test, workers violated safety protocols, causing a surge in electrical power within the plant. Despite attempts to shut down the reactor completely, another power surge triggered a chain of explosions inside. Eventually, the nuclear core was exposed, and radioactive material was released into the atmosphere. Firefighters tried to extinguish a series of fires at the facility, and helicopters were later used to drop sand and other materials to suppress the flames and contain the contamination. Although 2 people were killed in the explosions and many workers and firefighters were hospitalized, nearby areas, including the city of Pripyat, built in the 1970s to house plant workers, were not evacuated until about 36 hours after the disaster began. Announcing a nuclear accident to the public was seen as a major political risk, but by then it was too late. Radiation from the meltdown had already spread as far as Sweden, where officials at another nuclear plant began asking questions about what was happening in the USSR. At first, Soviet authorities denied any accident, but on April 28th, they finally released a brief statement. A historic disaster. It soon became clear that the world was witnessing a historic event. About 30% of the 190 metric tons of uranium at Chernobyl had been released into the atmosphere, and the Soviet Union eventually evacuated 335,000 people, establishing a 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the reactor. At least 28 people died in the immediate aftermath of the accident, and more than 100 were injured. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation reported that more than 6,000 children and adolescents developed thyroid cancer as a result of radiation exposure, although some experts dispute this figure. International researchers estimate that around 4,000 people exposed to high levels of radiation could die from radiation-related cancers, while another 5,000 exposed to lower levels may face the same fate. However, the full impact of the disaster, including its effects on mental health and future generations, remains the subject of ongoing debate and research. What remains of the reactor is now enclosed within a massive steel containment structure completed in late 2016. Monitoring and containment efforts continue, and cleanup is expected to last at least until 2065. Long-term effects. The disaster's impact on surrounding forests and wildlife remains an active area of research. Shortly after the accident, a 4-square-mile area became known as the Red Forest, after trees turned reddish-brown and died due to high radiation exposure. Today, the exclusion zone is eerily quiet, yet full of life. While many trees have regrown, scientists have observed increased rates of cataracts and albinism in some wildlife species, along with a decrease in beneficial bacteria. However, due to the absence of human activity, populations of animals such as lynx and deer have increased. In 2015, scientists estimated that there were 7 times more wolves in the exclusion zone than in nearby reserves. The Chernobyl disaster also had broader consequences: economic and political losses that helped accelerate the collapse of the Soviet Union and fueled a global anti-nuclear movement. The disaster is estimated to have caused around $235 billion in damage. Belarus, which had 23% of its land affected, lost about 1/5 of its agricultural land and spent 22% of its national budget on Chernobyl-related efforts in 1991 alone. Today, Chernobyl attracts tourists interested in its history and danger.